Casualties this time of the 80s. As you would expect, this time the material is far wider. There are much more numerous bands that could be mentioned here. So obviously there is some randomness or some subjectivity. It's impossible to cover them all, and not everybody has the same idea. But I want to start with one that might not squarely belong into this category, and that band is Marillion, known to a lot of prog fans, and some people call it the Genesis of the 80s, which is a pretty apt nickname, if you will. I kind of agree with it, and that band really deserves more recognition. But they definitely don't fall in the obscure category, so they're out there, and a lot of people know about them, but those who don't, I would wholeheartedly recommend them. If you like Genesis, but you want a little bit more spice, a little bit more of a kick, a little bit more of a modern twist on it, but not with, I just say, the commercial flair that a lot of people consider to be sellout. One called Marillion is the band for you. They have the live album, which is very famous, Reel to Reel, and of course Fugazi, which is my personal favorite. Their first or second album, Misplaced Childhood, uh, also a great album. So definitely worth checking out. And I'm mentioning them not only because I want to bring them to light, but because there is another band that could be in some ways considered their twin band, in quote marks, of course, and that band is 12th Night. 12th Night is unfortunately a band that never made it out of the 80s. They really only have one full-length album. They have a debut, kind of an EP mini album, if you will. I think it's 5 songs and about 15 to 20 minutes per side, a little bit less maybe. So kind of not quite a full-length album. And that one is called Art and Illusion. Definitely worth checking out. And for the moment, the name of their full-length bona fide album escapes me. That already has been released with a different vocalist. This is a band that exemplifies maybe the madness of what was called alternative in those days. So kind of in the vein of, let's just say, Joy Division and these kind of band that was so-called against the establishment, right? Johnny Rotten famously wore a I Hate Pink Floyd t-shirt, but I don't think it would have gone well for him, or he would have ever dared wear I Hate Beatles t-shirt. But again, that's a whole different discussion. Back to 12th Night, definitely worth checking out. So it has this hateful, hysterical, communist, far left kind of lyrics, and then it's venom, that hatred, but it makes the whole music pulsate and be very crazy. So imagine Marillion, if you're familiar with them, on steroids and with a good amount of anger and hatred in it. Another band that would probably sound very familiar to Maiden fans is Praying Mantis, which had another iteration called Stratus, but essentially the same band. The Troy brothers, Tino and I think Chris Troy, with Danny Stratton, who himself was in Maiden, and Clive Burr, who also was in Maiden. And they kept playing on throughout the entire time. So Praying Mantis, if I'm not mistaken, is still around. They released records sporadically, not in a very consistent way, but throughout the 80s and 90s. And the one that's really worth checking out is the debut, Time Tells No Lies. But they have a lot of other very good records. Another band that in recent years got quite some exposure, so they kind of starting to get the recognition that unfortunately they didn't get in their time, which was a very busy, very crowded time. So it was far easier, even for very good bands, to fall between the cracks. And I think by now you know that I'm talking about Badlands, right? Badlands had Eric Zinger, who ended up in Kiss and was with Gary Moore previously. Some great band, very good, kind of, sort of, in a similar vein to Blue Murder, and had some great musicians released, I think, one or maybe two albums, but they were very good. They weren't around for a long time, and unfortunately they didn't make it, which is a pity because they should have been bigger than they ever were. I could say the same about King Cobra, which was Carmine Appice's band, and they had an album in '85 and possibly a follow-up album a year or two later, and they also fell into the trap of all the big hair and the makeup and all that stuff, and of course they were ridiculed with all of those bands when the time came to phase out that side of history. So when the journalists or the press in general turned on these kinds of bands, of course they got swept along with them very unfairly because they were very very good. Maybe not in the top five, but they were very good. If Carmine is there, you know him. He's a professional. He doesn't take these just garbage musicians. So the music was good. The sound was good. They were good produced. They played well. The songs were good. Of course, cheesy and catchy as you'd imagine, but definitely worth a spin. King Cobra, Ready to Strike, I think the record is called, and there might be a second one. Blue Murder, of course, I think we spoke about Blue Murder in the obscure bands or the bands that only have one off or never really made it. That's really sad. Again, we have Carmine Appice again, and of course they have the Whitesnake and the Thin Lizzy connection uh, via John Sykes, who unfortunately left us not long ago. And of course, we had Tony Franklin, who at the time wasn't really known. Actually, he never made it. It's kind of crazy to me that such a great musician, like the Jaco Pastorius of the heavy metal hard rock sort of style, the fretless bass monster, never really made it. The Firm didn't work out. That was kind of a super group that with Paul Rogers and Jimmy Page. Unfortunately, went nowhere, and neither did Blue Murder, but definitely worth checking out, as is their second and final record in '94. Of course, the lineup changed by then. They had Marco Mendoza on bass, and they had another drummer, which is pretty unknown, but did a pretty good job on their much more heavier record. But I feel bad for John Sykes. After that, he went into kind of this long, self-induced depression, hibernation, instead of doing something. But again, he's gone, so let's not criticize the man uh, for his mistakes. Another band that I very, very strongly recommend is Icon. They have a record, Night of the Crime. I actually spoke about it in one of the other videos. Very, very good record. They had one, maybe two records before that, and one and possibly two after, but none of them is as good as Night of the Crime. Perfection. The album is throughout perfection. I am most reminded of King Cobra and Wasps, The Electric Circus by that record, but very very good. Definitely worth a check out. There's another band that kept releasing records and always remained underneath the radar. One of their songs, and maybe some of their songs, made it to a couple compilations, and that's the band Riot. Mark Real, who died, I think in the early 2010s, was the leader of the band, the guitar player, and he wrote most of the material. They had quite some very very good material. Imagine a better version, harder, rougher version of Quiet Riot and Rat, maybe. New York band. Not bad, definitely worth checking out. I don't remember the name of the albums, but they have a mascot which is kind of like a seal, like a silly kind of idea. In my opinion, it never worked, but Narnia, I think, is one of their better records. Check it out. Late '70s to maybe early '90s or so, and then they had a revival at a certain point. So Riot, 100% definitely worth checking out. Then, of course, there is Angel, who at some point did get their 15 minutes of fame in the sun, sort of, kind of. I think that at a certain point they were associated with Striper. I don't know if they are admittedly or officially a Christian band, but they have kind of that vibe to them to some extent. So I don't remember right now if they really made a big deal out of it or it was part of their who they were. But Angel, definitely worth checking out. Some of their records, they're all wearing all white, kind of to look like agents, and they did some very checkout worthy material that one should spend some time exploring. They have a number of albums, and they were around for a long time, but again, never really broke through the surface of the public consciousness, which is a pity. And I'm gonna close again with another band in the same vein as April Wine, and I'm mentioning April Wine because maybe they belong here more than in the 70s. So they were in some way more of a casualty of the 80s than the 70s, or maybe of both. Their twin band that's very often mentioned in one breath with them is Coney Hatch, another Canadian band, another band that's definitely worth checking out. Some good, hard, strong, listen-worthy material. They released a bunch of albums, 4 or 5 albums throughout the 80s. Coney Hatch from Canada, and again, we could go on and on. There's so many bands that could be mentioned that really weren't as big as they should have. Love Hate, for example, is another one. But I think that will be enough for today. So again, Marillion, 12th Night. Definitely check out 12th Night. Praying Mantis with Stratus, Badlands. We have King Cobra. We have Icon, Blue Murder, Riot, Angel, and finally Coney Hatch. I'll see you on the next one. And in the meantime, don't forget to rock on and on and on.